Attorney General Steve Marshall joined 19 other state attorneys general who penned a letter last week to the Education Department that opposes the teaching of critical race theory in classrooms. The officials asked Education Secretary Miguel Cardona to reconsider a program that would offer funding for schools that specifically add culturally and linguistically responsive curriculum to history and civics classes. The proposed priorities are a thinly veiled attempt at bringing into our state's classrooms the deeply flawed and controversial teachings of critical race theory and the 1619 Project, they wrote. In April, the department proposed priorities for federal grant programs for American history and civic education. The department recommends efforts like the 1619 Project, a critically acclaimed effort from journalists and historians to examine the American history and politics back to the year when the first African slaves arrived in Virginia. The federal recommendations do not reference critical race theory, an academic idea pioneered by black lawyers and scholars that argues racism is rooted in the nation's founding and systemic racism continues to affect the way people of color are treated. Critics have called CRT another form of racism, but deans of the University of California Law Schools, among others, wrote in 2020 that it is a discipline that helps people confront, with unflinching honesty, how race has operated in our history and present. The goal of racial equality is, while comforting to many whites, more illusory than real for blacks, civil rights attorney Derrick Bell wrote in 1992. For too long, we have worked for substantive reform, then settled for weakly worded and poorly enforced legislation, indeterminate judicial decisions, token government positions, even holidays. The concept of critical race theory, or even suggestions of lectures that discuss race and racism, has become a flashpoint in American schools and universities over the past year. Lawmakers latched onto the controversy in many states, and introduced bills in 15 states, according to Education Week. However, the bills don't specifically reference critical race theory, and instead take broad aim at discussions of racism, sexism and oppression, or even, in Texas, any discussion at all of public policy and events. Alabama did not consider any bans or limitations on teaching critical race theory during its recent legislative session. A bill that would require all students take a course on Black history failed. The State Department has not issued guidance about increasing diversity in coursework or addressing opportunity gaps, but is working on an overhaul of social studies curriculum for the first time since 2010. A committee began meeting in January.